Hello, everybody. My name is Troy Kerfman, and I am a senior undergraduate student at Drake University studying law, politics, and society, and rhetoric, media, and social change. And this is my senior honors thesis. The research that I decided to conduct for my honors thesis combines a childhood fixation of mine, horror movies, with a newfound passion that I have acquired during my time as a rhetoric, media, and social change student, which is problematic identity representation within mass media. Studying critical research at university has taught me to be more conscious of the problematic implications of the media that I engage with. However, many Americans do not take, or are simply not provided with, media literacy classes during their high school and college careers. So, I wanted my project to bring to the public's attention the importance of media literacy, because many forms of mass media rely upon stereotypical and repetitive depictions of individual bodies, which may prove hegemonic and oppressive when they are not challenged. When re-examining the handful of 1970s and 80s horror movies that I grew up watching, I was astounded by the blatant sexism, hypersexualization, and heteronormativity that I found. I began to wonder how my younger self's conception of male and female gender performativity was impacted as a result of engaging with these discourses. I decided then and there that I wanted to research and write a paper that would orient these disenfranchising depictions within their relevant historical context. The post-sexual revolution United States. I subsequently wanted to argue that the oppressive portrayals of women within these films reflected traditional American values and therefore continue to be reproduced, albeit in constantly evolving ways, in the modern film industry. Because I knew that my project would discuss the heteropatriarchy portrayed within classic horror films, I appropriately titled my work, Scared Straight. Now, the first question that you are probably thinking to yourself is, Troy, why horror movies specifically? Lots of different genres of movies, television shows, books, and animation all depict gender in problematic ways. Why do you have to take a shot at the horror industry? Well, the reason I chose to examine horror films specifically lies in the fact that, as a genre, horror often escapes critical examination because it is viewed as low culture. Apart from some admirable recent work by director Jordan Peele, horror films are hardly ever in the conversation for Best Picture. Additionally, there seems to be a stigma, at least in certain circles, around enjoying horror movies. People who enjoy horror have been known to be labeled as creepy, sick, or even as gluttons for pain and punishment. I know from my own experience as a high school student that admitting that I enjoyed watching horror films regularly, and not just at Halloween time, earned me some sideways glances. However, despite this low culture moniker, which appears to drive some academics away from studying the horror industry, it is important to critically analyze the socio-critical implications of the stories within horror because, while fictitious, these films strive to establish elements of the paranormal within ordinary and recognizable human life. Thus, horror movies, while certainly fictitious, absurd, and ludicrous, advance tangible arguments regarding how human beings should act. In an effort to study the most widely distributed horror films, I chose to specifically curtail my research to slasher films, which depict a singular male psycho killer who stalks, torments, and ruthlessly murders dozens of unsuspecting victims, particularly women. Slasher films have consistently and historically been under fire for their supposed gratuitous gore, shameless hypersexualization of female characters, and seeming non-care for developing a coherent story. But, despite their bad reputation, slasher films are also one of the horror industry's most viewed and recognized subgenres. So I knew that if I wanted to study films which were enjoyed by large populations of people, choosing the slasher film was obvious. Upon rewatching three of the most popular slasher films of all time, Halloween, 1978, Friday the 13th from 1980, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984, I realized that there existed a similarity in method of storytelling among the three. Each of these three classic films features a singular killer whose identity is obscured, chasing down and murdering promiscuous teenagers. Interestingly, the male victims in these three films are often killed quickly, by surprise, and without much fanfare. The deaths of the female victims, on the other hand, were usually drawn out, involving extensive chase scenes that place the characters in vulnerable positions, and which occasionally end with the character either semi-naked or with a drenched, see-through top. Notably, the final character left alive in each of these films is female, and this character defeats the murderer in each of these three stories. The occurrence of the final character alive being a female is a staple of the slasher genre, and it is commonly referred to as the final girl trope. The final girl narrative employs the following elements. The last character alive in a slasher movie is female, and she is able to survive because she is distinguishable from her dim-witted and hypersexualized female co-stars. Unlike the movie's other female characters, the final girl reflects masculinist attitudes in that she is level-headed, capable, and butch. The secondary female characters in a slasher film are typically given little to no character development, seem interested in nothing but sex, and are essentially included in the script only to serve as the male audience's visual pleasure. The final girl, on the other hand, proves herself the killer's equal, consistently pairing his attacks with her courageousness and resourcefulness. It was immediately clear to me upon discovering this trope that slasher films use the final girl narrative to take a stance on gender. What that precise message is, however, is not clear. In a subgenre full of shameless female nudity, many regard the inclusion of the final girl trope as a progressive women's empowerment stance. I decided to dedicate my project to evaluating the truth of this claim. So I crafted my research question as follows. How do 1970s and 80s slasher films construct gender and sexuality through the use of the final girl trope? In order to holistically investigate how 70s and 80s slasher films engage with gender discourses by use of the final girl trope, I decided to conduct three distinct analyses. First, a rhetorical criticism of the social roles and social values as they relate to gender and sexuality, which are apparent within these selected films. Second, a film analysis of the relevant capturing techniques used to physically compose and translate the slasher films' picture. And third, a political economy analysis of the individual movie studios which produce the selected films. A rhetorical criticism is the process of thinking about symbols, discovering how they work, and trying to figure out how they affect us. Symbols are something that stand for or represent something else by virtue of relationship, association, or convention. Importantly, symbols are the medium for human communication. People rely upon symbols, such as both verbal and nonverbal language, to convey ideas, to call attention, and to facilitate common understanding. Therefore, the practice of rhetorical criticism is essentially the systemic investigation and explanation of symbolic acts and artifacts for the purpose of understanding communicative processes. In other words, the goal of rhetorical criticism is simply to help people recognize and explain how specific symbols come to obtain meaning, as well as what kinds of responses these symbols evoke within us. Ultimately, my research discovered that slasher films reinforced popular notions of hegemonic masculinity by means of normalization, or by suggesting that certain kinds of behavior are standard or normal. As an ideology, hegemonic masculinity functions not only to mandate the gender performance of males, but it also functions to construct the opposite, feminine embodiment as well. Conceptions of hegemonic masculinity rely significantly on constructions of both patriarchy and heterosexuality, emphasizing male toughness, competitiveness, and the subordination of women. In accordance with hegemonic masculinity, power and capability are equated with the male sex, whereas the female sex is expected to be dependent, weak, and incapable. Additionally, I conducted a film analysis of the selected movies' technological productions, including their composition of image, camera work, use of sound, editing, lighting, and realism. The purpose of criticizing the use of filming techniques is to offer an explanatory model that makes connections between an individual movie and other areas of culture in an effort to illuminate both the culture and the movie it produces. Simply put, filming techniques convey meaning. Film producers utilize various strategies to tell their stories, which can call the audience's attention to what the producer wants it to notice. Similarly, filming techniques can be used to help the audience identify with certain characters, make subtle connections, and enjoy various pleasures, all of which are constructed, both deliberately and inadvertently, by the film's producer. Thus, an analysis of the selected film's production techniques will provide insight into what kinds of cultural ideologies influence the individual directors, as well as what cultural ideologies the films themselves subsequently reproduce. Finally, I performed a political economy analysis of the relevant media and cultural industry. The phrase media and cultural industry expresses an inherent truth regarding modern mass culture. In many countries around the world, cultural industries are promoted not only as a public good, but also as a means of wealth production. So, to truly understand the media industry, one must look to the money. The film industry relies upon constant and repeated use of character archetypes and storytelling tropes to render their products recognizable and acceptable to the viewing audience in an effort to turn a profit. However, repeated reliance on such stereotypes can influence the public's perception of the real and can therefore bolster problematic and oppressive ideologies as they relate to identity categories. My research ultimately discovered an obsession within the slasher genre regarding the marketability of the sexual and promiscuous female body, the technological advancements used to display increasingly gruesome acts of violence against female victims, and the resulting exploitative pleasure that was meant for a young adult male audience to enjoy. As I have mentioned, conducting these three analyses compel me to answer my research question like so. The final girl trope has bolstered the hegemonic masculine sentiment that in order to be competent, one must act like a man, thereby codifying feminist empowerment as desiring masculinist features. In other words, the final girl of 1970s and 80s slasher films was not a progressive, sexually empowered figure. Although it is true that final girls differentiate themselves from their helpless, idiotic, and promiscuous female side characters, they are only capable insofar as they concede to the dominance of hegemonic masculinity. Therefore, to survive, final girls must revoke their lustrous and provocative femininity and adopt a masculine gender performance. Here, let me show you what I'm talking about. The photographs that I'm about to show you are all from the godfather of all slasher movies, 1978's Halloween. The main protagonist of this film is pictured here. Her name is Laurie Strode, and yes, you can tell immediately that she's going to be our final girl. Almost everything about Laurie's character is exactly the opposite of the attributes that her friends possess. Laurie is studious and intelligent. Her friends are carefree and like to party. Laurie is observant and careful. Laurie's friends are oblivious and idiotic. Laurie is fixated on her babysitting responsibilities. Laurie's friends have sex in the houses of the children that they're supposed to be babysitting. As the movie progresses, Laurie's friends are predictably dispatched with haste. Linda's boyfriend, Bob, seen here, is killed quickly and by surprise, giving him little ability to fight back. Linda, on the other hand, is given quite a different treatment by the film's producers. Michael Myers, the film's resident killer, we'll get back to him in a second, takes his time to really enjoy Linda's kill. He starts by wearing a bedsheet and pretending to be Bob, who Linda believes has returned from his beer run downstairs. Michael then proceeds by refusing to acknowledge Linda in any way, prompting Linda to try and provoke Bob in a fashion that is completely consistent with her character, flashing him with her chest. After Michael remains unresponsive still, Linda decides to call Laurie, who is babysitting across the street, and this leads to arguably the movie's most infamous kill. Michael sneaks up behind Linda, who is still topless and lying on the bed, and then proceeds to strangle her to death using the phone cord. It's a truly disturbing image to behold. Linda, who has her back to the killer, is completely unable to fight back in any way. Michael slowly and deliberately tightens his grip around Linda's neck, literally lifting her into the air as she thrashes around trying to free herself. The camera remains on the scene for uncomfortably long periods of time, as the audience is forced to watch, about as helplessly as Linda feels, and wait for Linda's struggles to finally give out. The scene composes of no sound outside of the pair's grunting and gasps for breath, which, when considered in tandem with Linda's nakedness and the scene taking place in a bed, gives the entire scene an unpleasantly erotic feel. The scene can be very much interpreted as Michael, the dominant of the two, asserting his physical control over Linda, the submissive, through an act of sexually charged asphyxiation. In fact, the scene is consistent with Michael's own story arc, because throughout the film, Michael repeatedly tries to assert his control over women as a means to recover his lost masculinity. Michael Myers does not fit into the proper conceptions of a masculine man because he is not a heterosexual womanizer. In fact, he's rather sexually confused. As a child, Michael watches as his teenage sister has sex with her boyfriend, and this loss of innocence appears to be the catalyst for his murderous rampage. Using a kitchen knife, Michael stabs his still naked sister to death, resulting in him being committed to Smith's Grove Sanitarium until he is able to escape 20 years later, when this movie takes place. Fueled by his incomprehension of sexuality, Michael seeks to punish Haddonfield, Illinois' promiscuous teens, particularly the girls. Michael takes fascination with Laurie and proceeds to stalk her throughout Halloween Day. When he is not stalking Laurie, Michael instead spies upon Laurie's friends, Annie and Linda, specifically when they are alone, compromised, or not wearing any clothes. It is from these long, unbroken shots of the killer's point of view that we, the audience, truly understand Michael. He derives his sexual pleasure not from sexual acts themselves, like the masculine man, but from watching, tormenting, and ultimately murdering unsuspecting victims, particularly women. This could be the reason why Michael's weapon of choice is a kitchen knife, which allows for up-close, intimate, and penetrative kills. When considering the character of Michael Myers from a perspective that incorporates his fall from masculine grace, it is apparent that his knife itself acts as Michael's phallus, and it is the source of his power. Using his favorite knife, Michael acts swiftly to incapacitate any male characters who become aware of his presence, but with female characters, Michael likes to take his time, almost as if he doesn't respect their ability to fight back. In the words of famous horror critic Carol Clover, the men die because they make mistakes. The women die because they are women. Like Michael, Laurie struggles throughout the film to neatly fit within either weak, helpless femininity or powerful, capable masculinity. In accordance with the movie's logic, Laurie's biological sex should dictate that she acts in accordance with defenseless and lustrous femininity. Yet, as it has already been pointed out, Laurie is distinct from the other female characters. Unlike Annie and Linda, Laurie is able to discern that something is amiss. She interprets from Linda's phone call, despite Linda's lack of words, that she is in trouble and in need of help. As such, Laurie travels across the street to check in on her. After discovering the myriad of bodies that Michael has left behind, Laurie runs into the Spectre himself, but is able to escape his first strike unscathed. After being thrown down the stairs, Laurie is able to break away from Michael and flee the house, despite him having previously blocked 2 separate doors. Running back to her original babysitting house, Laurie is able to alert the children to let her in by throwing a potted plant at their upstairs window. Once inside, she smartly hides the children away while awaiting Michael's imminent arrival in a closet. In this infamous scene, Laurie quickly fashions a weapon out of a coat hanger and delivers a painful strike to Michael's eye. To follow up this attack, Laurie metaphorically castrates Michael by grabbing his fallen knife and stabbing him with it. This incapacitates Michael long enough for Laurie to find the children and tell them to escape to safety. Laurie's resourcefulness and capability in this chase scene are abundantly clear and provide a stark contrast to Annie and Linda's earlier obliviousness and incapability. Several times during the sequence, Laurie demonstrates her formidability, from breaking through a blockaded door, to using a potted plant to gain entry to a house, and fashioning a makeshift weapon to successfully defend herself. None of the film's female characters, apart from Laurie, could have possibly achieved these feats. But why is this? The answer lies within gender performance. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? By this movie's logic, women are inherently weak, passive, helpless, and dependent, while men are naturally strong, competitive, formidable, and capable. Laurie, who struggles throughout the movie to find her place amongst these identities, finally discovers it during the film's climax. She's not empowered as the movie studio wants you to believe. Instead, Laurie bowed to the superior strength of hegemonic masculinity and likewise adopted a masculine persona in order to survive. Therefore, the final girl trope does not actually challenge predominant, powerful conceptualizations of gender performance. Instead, this trope reaffirmed the public's imagination that two polar opposite genders do exist and that all people must choose a side. Laurie's survivalist behavior in this chase scene is only surprising to us, the audience, because the film producers themselves convinced us that this did not represent accurate female behavior. It is not progressive to simply make female characters act as if they are strong, capable men. Instead, movie studios should be portraying characters of all different types of genders, sexualities, racial backgrounds, and abilities without conforming to notions that there is only one specific way that a person holding a certain identity can act. By engaging with this trope, movie studios were able to profit off of a young adult male audience's desire to witness scantily clad teenage girls be horrifically murdered in increasingly gruesome fashions, all while maintaining a disguise of progressive female sexual empowerment. Ironically, the most terrifying aspect of a horror movie seems to not be the murderous, bloodthirsty apparition on screen, but is instead their reliance upon dominant constructions of identity performance that we learn to internalize and reproduce in our day-to-day lives. Thank you for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed.